It's September 13th, 1848, and you are having the best year of your life. Your name is Phineas Gage. You're 25 years old, the youngest foreman on the Rutland and Burlington Railroad, and your crew is blasting a path through the granite hills of Vermont. Your bosses call you the most capable man they've ever employed. Your men would follow you anywhere. You grew up on a New Hampshire farm, and you earned this job the slow way, by being the steadiest man on every crew you ever joined. Your bosses describe you as shrewd, energetic, and persistent. The men trust you with their lives because your judgment has never failed them. Your job is dangerous, but you're good at it. You drill a hole into the rock, pour in the blasting powder, and pack it down with a custom iron bar you had made just for you. You designed it yourself, and a blacksmith forged it to your exact drawing. 3 feet, 7 inches long, 13 pounds. Pointed at one end, smooth as a javelin. You are proud of that bar. Remember that. The thing about to erase you is something you designed. You've done this 1,000 times. Powder, sand, tamp it down, step back, boom. But at 4:30 in the afternoon, somebody calls your name. You look over your shoulder for 1 second, and you bring the iron bar down before the sand goes in. The bar strikes the granite. A spark. The powder ignites. And 13 pounds of iron leave the hole like a bullet, enter your face just under your left cheekbone, pass behind your left eye, tear through the front of your brain, exit the top of your skull, and land 80 feet away, sticking out of the dirt. You should be dead before you hear the bang. Instead, you're about to become the most important patient in the history of neuroscience. Here's what happens next, and every word of this is documented. Phineas is knocked flat. His limbs twitch, and then, within minutes, he sits up and starts talking. His men rush him to an ox cart, and he rides 3/4 of a mile into town, sitting upright the whole way, telling the story to anyone who will listen. At the hotel, he climbs down with barely any help, sits on the porch, and waits for the doctor. And when Dr. John Harlow arrives, Phineas looks up at him, points to the hole in his head, and calmly says he's got some work to do. Then he asks how soon he can go back to the railroad. He's guessing a day or two. Harlow doesn't believe any of it until he examines the wound and realizes he can pass his finger straight down through the top of the skull. The man he is touching should not be speaking. The man he is touching is asking questions about work. But what follows is the part the miracle stories usually skip. The wound gets badly infected. Phineas sinks into a coma, and the family is told to prepare for the worst. The town carpenter actually measures him for a coffin. Then Harlow drains the infection, and the 25-year-old simply refuses to die. He loses the vision in his left eye for good. But by November, he's walking around town, and by spring, Phineas Gage is working again, talking, remembering everything, strong as ever. The newspapers call it a miracle. His doctor calls him fully recovered. His friends were about to learn that recovered was the wrong word. To understand what was lost, you have to know what he was. Before the accident, the record is almost embarrassing in its praise. Temperate habits, a shrewd head for business, the kind of man who finished what he started every time, and who other men quietly tried to be. That's who walked up to the blast hole on September 13th. The first signs that someone else walked away from it were small. The polite foreman now swore in front of women. Strange, but the man did have a hole in his head. Then it got worse. The man who planned railroad blasts down to the pound of powder now couldn't hold a plan for an afternoon. He'd commit to something, abandon it, commit to something new, abandon that. He became impatient, stubborn. He'd insult a man, then genuinely wonder why everyone was upset. His own doctor wrote down what he saw, and the words are chilling. Fitful, irreverent, grossly profane, impatient of anything that stood between him and what he wanted. Harlow summed up the man in one sentence: a child in his intellect, with the animal passions of a strong man. The railroad company that called him their best man looked at what came back and refused to rehire him. Not because he was weak, his body was fine, because the employee they'd known did not exist anymore. And his friends, the men who'd worked beside him for years, started saying the sentence that made this case immortal. Gage, they said, was no longer Gage. Think about how strange that sentence is. They didn't say he was sick. They didn't say he'd changed. They said the man was gone, and something else was answering to his name. So, what did the iron actually destroy? The front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, sits right behind your forehead, and it has one giant job. It's the brakes. Every impulse you don't act on, every rude thought you don't say out loud, every plan you stick with when you'd rather quit, that's the front of your brain, quietly overruling the rest of you, hundreds of times a day. Try it right now. Think of the most inappropriate thing you could shout, wherever you are. Notice that you didn't shout it. That silence you just experienced, that invisible hand holding it back, is the exact circuitry the bar removed from Phineas Gage. He didn't lose his memories. He didn't lose his words or his strength, because those live in other places. He lost the brakes. The wanting was still there. The stopping was gone. The front of the brain does one more thing, and losing it explains the rest of Gage's story. It runs simulations. Before you say the honest thing to your boss, a little preview plays in your head. His face, the awkward silence, the meeting afterward. You feel the consequence before it exists, and that feeling steers you somewhere smarter. Gage lost the preview. Every decision arrived with no forecast attached. Of course, he couldn't hold a plan. He could no longer feel the future. And a century and a half later, science confirmed it. In 1994, researchers took Gage's actual skull and rebuilt the bar's path through his brain on a computer. It cut through the exact region we now know handles impulse control and decision-making. Modern patients with damage there score normally on IQ tests. They remember everything, and their lives still fall apart because they insult their friends, gamble their savings, and abandon every plan, just like a foreman from 1848. Gage still happens quietly in hospitals every year. Here's why doctors still talk about him. Before Gage, most people believed your character was something separate from your body. A soul, a spirit, something the meat couldn't touch. Gage was the proof nobody wanted. Personality is physical. It has an address. And if it can be destroyed by 13 pounds of iron, it was never separate from the brain at all. You are not a passenger in your head. You are the head. The story usually ends there, but the real ending is stranger and a little more hopeful. Gage drifted for years. For a while, he was literally a sideshow exhibit, appearing at Barnum's Museum in New York, posing with the iron bar that went through his head. He carried that bar everywhere for the rest of his life. His family called it his constant companion, but then he took a job driving stagecoaches in Chile. 6 horses, fixed routes, the same demanding routine every single day, for years. And the structure seemed to rebuild some of what the bar took. The reports from those years describe a man who was steady, employed, holding his life together. The brain that was torn apart had partially rewired itself, one repetitive day at a time. Doctors now point to Gage not just as proof that the brain builds the self, but as one of the first documented cases of the brain repairing the self. He died in 1860, after the damaged brain finally gave way to seizures. His skull, and the bar that made him famous, sit in a display case at Harvard to this day. And here's a detail almost nobody knows. For 150 years, no one knew what Phineas Gage looked like. He was a skull in a case and a lesson in a textbook. Then, in 2009, a family's old photograph was identified as him, and it shocked the scientists. No broken sideshow wreck. A handsome, well-dressed, confident man, one eye closed forever, holding the iron bar that went through his head like a soldier holding a rifle. He had it engraved. The man whose self was taken apart posed, proudly, with the thing that did it. Scientists are still arguing about what that photograph means 170 years later. So tonight, when you decide to say the polite thing instead of the honest thing, or stick with a plan you're sick of, notice it. That's the 3 millimeters of brain that Phineas lost, working perfectly, invisibly, on your behalf. Every version of you that behaves, every promise you keep, every person who trusts you, is riding on a piece of tissue thinner than a coin. An iron bar proved that you is a place, and yours is doing just fine. If this one stuck with you, subscribe. I tell the true stories of what our brains do when nobody's watching.